I think, when someone comes in here, and a lot of times, they're not coming from across the street, they're coming from California or some, far away place. They took all the time to come here. Like they've got real concerns, and I've got to take that seriously. If it's important to them, it's got to be important to me. And the other thing is that if you've got a real concern, it's grounded in reality. There's something going on.
Hello there, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Orthopreneurs Podcast. Today, I know we always have special guests, but today we've got a super special guest. Put your hands together and welcome Dr. Jeffrey Galvin, MD extraordinaire, and we're going to talk about some really cool stuff today. So welcome, Jeff.
Well, thanks, Glenn. Glad to see you. I'm wondering why you made me sign an NDA before we started.
Yeah. Well, for those of you out there, I've got to spill the beans up front here. Jeff and I have been friends for what year was it? Like 1985, I think it's been. I think it's been about 37 years we know each other. To put things in perspective, I went with Jeff to go see Platoon when it was in the theater, brand new. I remember.
That's right. We did. Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's right. I forgot.
Yeah, because I remember it was an amazing experience to go with you. For a long story we won't get into here. Yeah. But my point
We've known each other for a long time.
Yeah, we've known each other for longer than most of my orthodontic friends have been alive. Yeah. But that being said, the reason I have him on here today is because I didn't just know him as a really measured, great thinker in college. But when we graduated, I went on to dental school. He went on to medical school, and he'll tell you his story in just a minute. But for anybody out there who wants to really start shaping, and I mean that, shaping their future health, this is a guy you want to talk to. And I hope to get him into a summit at some point, because everybody who I introduce to him falls in love with the ideas that he's talking about and does the same thing that I am about to do with my wife in Charlotte. And that's why I had you sign the NDA. I don't want to talk about what me and my wife are going to do in Charlotte. But joking aside, we're going to get into the details of why I'm traveling to Charlotte for my health. And I'm, knock on wood, as far as I know right now, I'm perfectly healthy. And we're going to talk about all these things. So Jeff, let's do what I do with everybody. Let's start, take a minute or two and tell everybody a little bit about your history and how you ended up where you are right now, if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, thanks, Glenn. It was a very, very nice intro. Thank you very much. It's Glenn. So we went to college together. We were fraternity brothers. We've known each other for a long time. And when Glenn went off to dental school, I went to medical school and ultimately did an emergency medicine residency in Boston, and then spent a few years as a trauma physician in the military. And then when I got out of the military, moved to just outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, and started my sort of peacetime civilian career. And, part of the line, working crazy, how it is early in your career, you're working tons and tons and you're doing lots. And, I just was doing, I think, what everybody else does. And I was getting unhealthy. I was not feeling good. I had 3 young kids. I would get home. I was exhausted. I didn't know what to do. And then in the course of about a 3-month period, I had 3 guys come in to the ER who had basically sudden cardiac death out in the community, all less than 40, all died of heart attacks, including a guy that I knew whose wife was very good friends with my wife. And I, the guy was fit. He was 39. He was coming from the gym. He was he's pumping gas, dropped dead. And he came in. We ran the code for a long time. And I had to tell his wife, she came in and I remember, I'll never forget. She said, what did he do? I heard he tripped at the gas station. What did he do this time? And I had to tell her, he's dead. And it was terrifying. And, it really got me thinking about my own mortality, being kind of overweight at the time and really not healthy, and high blood pressure and high cholesterol. I was in my, mid 40s maybe, or actually, I guess my early 40s. I was overweight. I felt lousy. And I realized this could be me if I don't do something. And so I went to my doctor, and, he told me a bunch of nonsense. Work out more, eat less, you're fine. I'm like, well, I don't feel fine. And so I ended up doing, how we get sort of into the weeds of things. And I really started doing a lot of reading and research. And I, ended up doing the right labs and realizing, I've got these issues going on. I'm eating all wrong, and everything we're telling people how to eat, that's not right. And very quickly, in the matter of probably 3 months, I got myself back to feeling great, looking good, dropped a bunch of weight, was strong, was doing CrossFit, and my wife and I both had kind of made a really big 180 in our health. And all of a sudden, all these bad markers that we'd done in labs, they cleared up like remarkably, incredibly fast, actually. And we started our clinic because we were doing CrossFit, and people would always come up to me and say, "Hey, doc, what do you think about this?" And the owner of the CrossFit box said, "Hey, we got this empty office upstairs. You guys should start a clinic." And we started our first clinic about 13, 14 years ago in a CrossFit box. I'm talking no air conditioning in the summer, no heat in the winter, loud. We were only there for a little while. And then we eventually kind of expanded and grew. And then about maybe 5-6 years ago, we built a state-of-the-art facility just outside of Charlotte. And our focus has really been on optimizing human performance, and how sometimes our practices take paths we maybe didn't anticipate. Right. And it really morphed into working with executives and high performers, and really, trying to take this N of one approach to each individual patient, doing these really very in-depth evaluations, and then designing treatment plans to optimize health, reverse chronic disease, and optimize health and wellness and performance. And I always tell people, we're trying to get you to the far right of the bell curve. And, the dirty little secret is that in medicine, we really just want you to be in the middle. And I always tell our patients, like, the middle's Walmart. We all shop at Walmart, but we all kind of secretly hate going in there, but it's cheap and it's got basic stuff you need. But, if you won Powerball tomorrow and Nordstrom's or some really fancy place built this, crazy expensive, amazing supermarket right next to Walmart, where would you shop? And so we're really trying to make Nordstrom's people, not Walmart people. There's nothing wrong with being, your doctor putting you in the middle.
I've seen the people of Walmart. I've seen those pictures.
Yeah. But you want to be average. Like, we in medicine, we strive for average. And the other example I sometimes give people is that the way we practice medicine these days is a bit like teaching your child to drive by looking at the hood ornament. And if we do that, when do we know we hit the tree?
Right.
Not till we hit the tree. And then we've got a big problem. But that's not what we do. We say, look a half mile down the road, and if there's a tree there, just, don't hit it. But we treat symptoms, we wait till problems happen, and nobody really says, your blood pressure's a little high. Why is that? Or, you're
because I eat too much salt, right, Dr. Galvin?
Yeah, right. You eat too much salt,
Which we know, by the way, referencing that just for a second, the overwhelming, I think it's like 90% of people who have high blood pressure have salt independent high blood pressure. Now, there's reasons to have lower salt diets, right? But tell me, that is true, correct? That the
absolutely.
The overwhelming majority of people who already have high blood pressure, 90% of them have sodium independent high blood pressure, meaning eat all the salt you want, it's not going to affect your blood pressure. But like you said, medicine continues to push these doctrines that, having too much salt is going to raise your blood pressure. So, my grandfather on a low sodium diet to prevent his high blood pressure, right? But we're going to dive into all that, I promise. Because I just want to throw this in there real fast. The way I ran into Jeff, I hadn't seen Jeff in decades, right? One of my closest friends in college, you know how it goes. You go your own way, life goes in a way. And I've been on my kick the last year or two. Once I hit my 50s, I was like, I really want to reconnect with the people who are most important to me. And there, lo and behold, at my daughter's college weekend and alumni weekend was Jeff. And we were staying at the Soma Hotel, and we sat down. We're the only two geeks sitting in the breakfast area when nobody's sitting anymore, because it's the afternoon, going through a PowerPoint presentation on all of the biomarkers that are out there and the stuff that you lecture on around the country. And by the way, he lectured to the medical students that weekend, the pre-med students at school, at college. But I've been on my own journey the last 2 years or so about everything that we're learning nowadays, because would you agree that we really already kind of know in the medical field how to extend people's lives, how to extend people's quality of life, and the markers that are really the markers we have to look for that have nothing to do with what your doctor's talking to you about when you go in for your annual physical? Would you say those are fair statements?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that, our ability to analyze and predict disease increases all the time. The problem is that there is a little bit of I think, innate bias in medicine about making any one person better than anybody else. I don't know what that's about, but like, I've had doctors say, well, doing all this stuff, optimizing all this stuff, it's cheating. I'm like, they feel better. They're like, they don't have chronic disease. They're going to live longer. Like, how is that cheating? Well, because not everybody can do that. I'm like, well, not everybody can have a Ferrari, but,
Right.
we'd all like one, and if you have the means, like, why not do it? And, it would not be that hard for us to implement many of these things in a regular medical practice. But, our medicine is driven by insurance companies, by government, by, professional societies that have vested interests that are probably not to our benefit. And sometimes, they're attached to these ideas that they've been pushing for decades. And they're afraid if they say, oops, sorry about that. We got that one wrong. The whole thing about carbs and fat, like mea culpa, we got that one wrong. But no, they're not going to do that. They're going to continuing, like they slightly change the message a little bit every year. Like if you notice, the latest nutrition guidelines, cholesterol disappeared.
I didn't know that.
There's no cholesterol guideline anymore.
What was it?
It was, below certain, you wanted to have it below your dietary cholesterol below a certain level. Well, if you know anything about it, your cholesterol levels you produce all your own cholesterol. Your dietary cholesterol has no effect on your cholesterol. You make all the cholesterol that you need. You may metabolize that cholesterol and make new out of it, but so it just quietly like disappeared. And remember, like it was like the biggest thing everybody used to look at labels, like, oh, how much cholesterol does this have?
And if you bought Total cereal, it reduced, everything was about cholesterol. And so let's go back a little bit, because I know we're gonna have a fun time talking here about a lot of things. Let's start here. I'm 55 years old. I work out 6 days a week. I try to eat relatively healthy. I go to my physician, or up until now, we'll talk about what I've changed. I go to my physician, if I'm lucky, once every couple of years. They do a physical. I get a colonoscopy, right, as talked about by all the societies out there. When I go to my physician for my annual physical, you don't know my physician, or the new one is different, but you didn't know my physician. Would you say that, like you already said, is more of a Walmart approach? When I go there, I assume that's of some value, but what we're talking about really needing is a one-off approach. Does that really make that big of a difference, the one-off approach? And if so, how do I maintain that, right? So you could do a full day or a full 2-day physical on me, work through my genetics, work through everything. But how do I maintain that afterwards? So there's a two-part question here. Number one, what is different about what you're doing versus the traditional go see your doctor once a year or once every 2 years, whatever it is? And number two, how does one maintain the value of that after that initial exam?
Right. So, I mean, I'm not an orthodontist, but I imagine that, you don't have one treatment plan that you use for every single person that comes in the door.
No,
I'm imagining that there's, and having
I have
children
two.
that have
I have an A and a B.
I imagine that they had different, protocols, and so I can't ask you this question because you're you, and you don't have a 5-minute conversation with anybody because you're so, so friendly. But the average person
knows me well.
Spends about 5 minutes a year with their primary care doctor. Like that's about how much time the average person spends with their doctor. So what can you do in 5 minutes, really? I mean, you can it's easy to write a prescription, but can you really get to the root cause of anything?
Or prevention.
Or prevention, and even the things that we talked about this earlier, the things that we consider prevention, like colonoscopy, it's not prevention, it's early detection.
Right.
We're not preventing anything by having, colonoscopy doesn't prevent you from getting colon cancer. It just, if you happen to have colon cancer, you get to diagnose it a little bit earlier. And so it's a very, in medicine, we do a lot of things that are symptom based. And we also, take this viewpoint that we don't need to worry about that yet. I've had patients that have come in that we've done evaluations and they're basically diabetic, but their A1C is just pre-diabetic. So their doctors have literally said to them, well, you're pre-diabetic, you should eat a little bit better, but we don't need to worry about it until you become diabetic. And you're like, oh yeah, diabetes, I mean, the thing that causes cancer and heart disease and strokes and dementia, we should wait till that happens before we address it.
Right.
And, I'm of a belief that if you look closely, you can detect these things, years, maybe even decades before they become a problem. And if you can identify those things, then you can make those changes. And I'll give you a little military analogy. And, some people may not like this analogy, but I think it's an apt one. If I'm on the 100-yard rifle range and I've got a target 100 yards away from me and I fire my weapon and that bullet travels 99 yards, and let's say that target represents something I don't want, a chronic disease, heart disease, stroke, dementia, cancer. And that bullet is traveled 99 yards to the target. And I decide I don't want to have heart disease. I don't want to develop dementia. What can I do at that point to prevent the bullet from hitting the target? Well, short of God plucking that bullet out of the air, you're going to hit the target and you're going to have to deal with the consequences. Okay. Right. However, if I go to the rifle and I move that rifle 1 degree, just 1 degree, it's imperceptible. You can't even tell with your eye that 1 degree deflection. You know what that translates to on the 100-yard rifle range? Is a 6-foot miss. So, we can make changes early that have huge, exponentially larger consequences later on if we can identify those things early enough. And you can make very simple changes to lifestyle to make really a huge difference as we age. And the idea is, to have healthy 90 and 100-year-olds. And the fact is, we live in a time that we very well may see in our lifetime technologies that radically extend lifespan. Maybe, technology will come out that get us to live to be 120 and be fit and be mentally with it. If you're not healthy, when those technologies come, you're not going to be eligible for them. If you're riddled with chronic disease and your brain is tapioca from chronic insulin resistance and diabetes and hypertension and everything else, you're not going to be eligible because you've already done the damage. So the idea is maintain as high quality lifestyle and as high quality health and wellness as possible for as long as possible. I'm not interested in having fit, buff 90-year-olds who are drooling in a cup because they've got Alzheimer's. Right. Alzheimer's is skyrocketing, absolutely preventable. And not only that, but reversible, especially in the early stages, if you identify it early enough. And so that's what we're pretty passionate about. And, people go to the Mayo around here, they go to the Duke Executive Health, and I get patients from there all the time. And they're like, oh, I've gone and done this evaluation. And they go and it's kind of this whirlwind where they, you land at this one really nice office and then they send you off to get your colonoscopy and a stress test. And you see all these doctors. And at the end of the day, they have this pamphlet with everything. And somebody says, oh, everything looks pretty good. Or, you should do this. And they don't really look at it at the level of detail that needs to be looked at. Because you're different than me, you're different than the next guy. And the way we have to structure these things is very personalized. And so first of all, we try to give people certainty, clarity, and direction, right? Certainty is sort of doing this advanced testing, advanced lab work, cardiac calcium scans, genetics, epigenetics, neurocognitive testing, body composition scans, baseline workouts, mobility assessments, all these things to get this big can of data, to give us certainty about things. Do you have heart disease? Do you have early Alzheimer's? Do you have prediabetes? Do you have insulin resistance? We can answer those questions absolutely through this testing. Clarity means you're sitting down with me for a couple hours, and we're going to go through every one of those things, explain what your results mean and what they mean for you. And that's that clarity piece. And the direction is say, hey, what are we going to do about it? This thing is good. This thing is not so good. This thing is really bad. We need to keep doing these things. We need to change these things up a little bit, and we need to really focus on these things. And so that's that certainty, clarity, and direction that we try to do. But we all, I also spend huge amounts of time with people. And when people come in, and especially when they come on as executive patients, they have my cell phone. Most of my text conversations and phone conversations are not about their own health because we get them dialed in pretty good. It's all like, hey, did you see this cool article? Or it's usually or non-medical stuff. Did you see the game last night? But that's great because they're healthy. If I get a message like that from some CEO of some super stressed out CEO of some huge company, and he's feeling good enough to, text his doctor a joke. Like I'm like, okay, we've made some progress here. Because a lot of times these guys come in and they're incredibly stressed. And we have a very detailed questionnaire that looks at, work stress and life stress and even your background growing up as a kid, all that can inform. Even your epigenetics can reflect things that happened to you when you were a child. And so we try to dig into all that and try to give people a plan that's reasonable. And we also try to make it, for some of these things, I can't make it easy, right? Like if you come in and you're 400 pounds, like I can get you to lose that weight, but it's not going to be easy, but I can make it simple. And most of us can do simple. And so we try to, I don't dumb things down, but I try to explain things in a way that's digestible and actionable, and people can understand it. Like I understand why I'm doing this. I'm not just doing it because Jeff told me to do this.
Right.
I'm doing this because he kind of explained it to me, and I understand it has, it might be, I know it has something to do with my insulin, and I was pre-diabetic, but at least they have some basis in what, and like, we have a lot of, it was interesting when we started, 13, 14 years ago, we, as an ER doctor, and I had a lot of skeptic, primary care doctors in the community. And it was a tight-knit medical community at the time. It's changed with, corporatization of medicine. It's not quite so tight anymore. But back then, everybody knew everybody. And people were like, what the heck is he doing? And then I started curing their patients of diabetes and these chronic diseases. And after about a year, I started getting different phone calls like, hey, Jeff, I saw Mrs. Smith, like she's lost 50 pounds and she doesn't have diabetes anymore, and you got her off her blood pressure medicine. I'm not feeling that good. I've got high blood, can I come see you? And so now I've got like a really big population of physicians and dentists and some orthodontists and medical people who come to us because they've seen what we've done for their patients or their peers,
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is that very often we get people living lifestyles that they're not really allowed to tell their patients, which is insane, right?
Right.
I do this, but I've got cardiologists who are patients who like basically are forced to give these guidelines that they don't believe in. They're not the ones that they follow. They follow the guidelines we follow. But if they don't tell their patients this, they get dinged.
Right.
Because it's all monitored by the insurance companies and the systems and things like that. So it's a little bit different model. And then the idea is once we get people optimized, we follow them up from time to time. We baseline and then we check again. So we do a baseline workout, baseline DEXA scan. Then a few months later, we come back and do it again. We do baseline labs, and then we follow them up from time to time, because if we can't measure it, like it's not real.
Right.
Like, you can come and spend a bunch of money and time and effort and all this stuff. And, some people in their mind, because I did this, I feel better. Right. No, we have to measure it and make sure, and we have to continue measuring it. And one of the things we use is like epigenetics, which is measure of gene expression. And we can tell you how quickly you're aging. And very often what we find is that we do that test initially, and 6 months later, when they come back, their pace of aging has slowed. Their biologic age has dropped. Their telomere lengths have lengthened. It's crazy. Like those are our objective measurements of aging. Right. And the technology, we're in this sort of moment where knowledge is just accelerating, and we've always prided ourselves on, and I say I'm using the royal we here, I guess, but I prided myself on being at the very cutting edge of these things, and we've had great success over the years, and because of that. But also we have to be willing to kind of look convention, let it maybe go to the wayside sometimes. Sometimes conventional wisdom is neither,
Right.
And
there's a great podcast by Rich Roll. I've referenced him a few times on the show here. He's a former, I think, Stanford water polo player, a vegan ultra marathoner, like one of the first guys to ever really medal, if you will, in some of these really super long events as a vegan. And that's not my lifestyle, but I respect where he's coming from. And he did a great podcast episode on a masterclass in aging, where he did 15-minute interviews with the guy who runs the Harvard Longevity Project, or
oh, really?
right. Like, I'll get you the link for it, and maybe
I'd love to
I'll get
watch
in the
it.
show notes here. And everything was like 15 minutes of this and 15 minutes of that, and all the stuff that you and I talk about, right? IGF-1, CJC 1295 epimorelin, rapamycin. Like, for most people out there right now, they have no idea what you and I are talking about. And I equate this a lot to what's a buzzword in orthodontics is airway orthodontics, right? There are people out there who started the concept of believing, based on literature that came out of Stanford, Michigan, and other very well-respected institutions, that there's a huge percentage of the pediatric population who has not necessarily, obstructive sleep apnea, but they've got interrupted sleep as a function of some anatomical obstruction, whether it's adenoids, tonsils, septum, turbinates, whatever it may be. And that we as orthodontists, as gatekeepers, should look in and see what's going on. We often take a CBCT with very low radiation and have a view that nobody else has. Well, like everything else, there are people who are pioneers who push this out there and talk about it and cite the literature. And then there are people who take that literature, make a left turn at Crazyville, and give the rest of the field a very bad name. Yes. Because I went to here at in Dallas, I went to Medical City with my ENT, and we did a full grand rounds lit review for pediatricians, and they'd never heard of any of this stuff, right? This is literature out of Stanford, out of Sleep Magazine, Journal Sleep, like mainstream articles that they'd never heard of. Like, they didn't even know that these things existed. And we did a full lit review showing them why they needed to ask certain questions, why they needed to implement a certain questionnaire that was recommended out of Michigan on 2 occasions as being secondly, it says equal as a sleep study on a growing child. All right. Its specificity and sensitivity are better than a sleep study on a growing child, just by asking the right questions, which is exactly what you're talking about. But yet there's both pushback from the establishment. Wait a minute, we're orthodontists, we shouldn't be doing this. And there's this isn't my thing. I don't want to get into this. I'm happy doing straightening teeth. I don't need to ask these questions. I'll let my ENT do that. And just like for you with the longevity, with the fitness, with the health, it's almost incomprehensible to you that you can help people as a physician and you wouldn't do it, right? Mm-hmm. And so I completely know where you're coming from on this. And I want to hit you with a couple of questions here, because we've talked about a lot of really 30,000 foot stuff of, we can help people do this, we can, prevent this, we can help with aging. But let's talk a little bit about real life, boots on the ground, so to speak. Sure. So someone comes into you, they're pre-diabetic, right? They're on the whole pathway towards, and I'm going to ask you to define things. They're on their way to metabolic disease, right? And I'm going to ask you in a moment just to explain to people what metabolic disease is. Right. Let's define it first, what that is. And then number 2, what are some of the modalities at your disposal now that makes you different than my physician who says, Glenn, your A1C1 is close. What is it, like 6.3? Is that the cutoff? 5.3?
5.6.
5.6. I knew it was somewhere in it.
So 5.6 is normal. 5.7 is abnormal. Right.
5.7 is pre-diabetic, right?
Right.
Yeah. And then that goes to like 6.3 or so. Mm-hmm. And then
6.4 and then 6.5 is diabetes by definition.
Right. And so, Glenn, you're like at 5.6, 5.7. You're not pre-diabetic really, but you're getting close. Watch what you eat, stay away from sugary foods, try to exercise more. And then let's see what you look like in another year and a half or 2 years, or whatever the number is, which is exactly what you and I are talking about not being the right approach.
Right.
A, what is metabolic disease? And B, give me an example, if you don't mind, of how you can treat it differently in your approach.
Right. Funny, I just spoke about this in Denver a couple of weeks ago. And there's this thing called metabolic syndrome. And so metabolic
syndrome, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Is, this constellation of basically 5 things, and they're all related to being resistant to insulin. And when we talk about insulin resistance, let me explain what that means. Insulin is a storage hormone, right? And so insulin was, back in the day when we were like hunter-gatherers and we couldn't store food, we couldn't, we're on the verge of starvation all the time. If we didn't kill an animal, like, we might die if we didn't have some, we couldn't, if we didn't kill an animal for a few days, we were always on the verge of starvation. So God in his wisdom gave us this hormone called insulin. And so if you're a hunter-gatherer and you're wandering around and you happen to, stumble upon a field of berries, you don't eat one berry. You can't transport them. You can't store them. They're going to go bad. You eat all the berries. So we would gorge ourselves. We get this big rush of carbohydrates, right? And we're basically talking about glucose, which is this like little tiny molecule, right? So if I load up with carbohydrates and I don't do anything with that, glucose is going to be circling around the bloodstream. It's a real teeny tiny molecule. And what will happen is the kidneys will filter that molecule out and will pee it out. And so that's energy, though. And if we're on the verge of starvation, peeing out energy is not a great survival strategy. So God in his wisdom gave us this hormone. And so our blood sugar goes up, we release insulin, and insulin tells the cells, hey, grab those little tiny glucose particles out of the bloodstream and pull them inside, okay? Now, if we're starving, if we're hungry, we're going to convert that glucose typically to glycogen and store it near the mitochondria to use as fuel. But let's say that we happen to just have killed an animal and we gorged ourselves. So now we got this sort of excess. What do we do with it? Well, if our glycogen stores are full in the cell, insulin mediates this process where we convert glucose to glyceride, and glyceride is sort of a fat, right? And what happens is we take 3 of those glyceride molecules and we tie them together and we push them out into the circulation again. Now, 3 glycerides is a triglyceride. From your doctor, you go and get your cholesterol checked. That's one of the things. Now, triglycerides are a big molecule. Guess what? They're too big to get filtered by the kidney. So they bypass the kidney. They end up in the liver. They get wrapped up in a cholesterol molecule and transported. And I'll use a visual aid here. Hold on. And they get transported to.
And for those of you who are listening and not watching, he just grabbed a giant sponge.
Yeah. So this is a fake 10 pounds of fat. So this 10 pounds of fat is what that triglyceride gets stored as. So this is 10 pounds of fat, which is 10 pounds of triglycerides, which is 10 pounds of glucose, which is 10 pounds of energy. So it's a big battery. So now when we don't kill that animal for a couple of days, we've got some body fat that keeps us alive. So works great, and unfortunately, we went from being hunter-gatherers to, modern humans in 20, 30,000 years, but it takes 100,000 plus years for us to change our genes. So we still behave genetically the same way when we get exposed to these high levels of carbohydrates. But now we've got a McDonald's on every corner, a Starbucks in every corner, and we're getting loaded with these highly processed carbohydrates. And if you take a piece of whole wheat bread and you chew it up and you spit it on a glucose test strip, the strip will turn black. That's how quickly the glucose gets released when we have a processed food like a bread or something like that. So we're constantly raising our blood sugar levels. We're constantly releasing insulin and we're storing fat. And that's why we keep getting fatter and fatter and everything else. The problem is that if we keep doing that, if we have to release this much insulin for this much glucose over time, if we're constantly bombarding the system, we get insulin resistance and we've got to release more and more and more insulin. Okay. And so we start having high levels of insulin. Now, insulin in high levels is not a good thing at all. It's inflammatory. It causes inflammation of the blood vessels, which causes our blood pressure to go up. It's going to cause lipid abnormalities. It's going to cause our triglycerides to go up. It's going to lower our good cholesterol, our HDL. It's going to cause our waist to expand because we're going to be storing all this extra fat, extra sugar as fat, and especially visceral fat that's inside around the abdomen, around the organs. And eventually we'll get to a point where we can't compensate anymore and our blood sugars will start going up. And so metabolic syndrome is this advanced form of prediabetes, and it's got 5 criteria. And now you'll understand what the 5 criteria. Number 1, high triglycerides. We know why that is. Number 2, low HDL. Number 3, a slight elevation of blood pressure. A blood pressure above 135 over 85 gets you a point. Number 4, a waist size at the largest spot above 40 inches for men or 35 inches for female. And number 5, a fasting blood sugar above 100. If you have 3 of those criteria, you meet the criteria for metabolic syndrome. If you have metabolic syndrome, your cardiovascular risk goes up 60 or 70%. Your cancer risk doubles. Your risk of developing type 2 diabetes is 30% a year. And I cannot tell you how many people come in here with relatively normal looking labs. Oh, your triglycerides are up a little bit, your HDL, you should exercise some more. And they meet that metabolic syndrome criteria. And we look at their fasting insulin level, which their doctors never do. And you realize they're actually early diabetes. Even though their A1C is 5.6, their fasting insulin level is skyrocketed. It should be 6 and it's 20. That's early diabetes. I don't care like if it doesn't meet the criteria. That's in my mind diabetes. And we use all kinds of tools to sort of monitor, like this, a continuous glucose monitor.
I used one of those. Which one is that?
This is the new one. This is the Libre 3. So it's, I don't know if the old ones were kind of big and
the one I had looked like you took a furniture moving pad and slapped it.
Yeah, this is like a brand new one. So this is like, it's about the size of a dime and it's real small. And the other nice thing is that the old one you had to scan with your phone.
It was so difficult to put my phone under my arm. And
this is continuous. So
that's beautiful.
It's great. They just came out. As a matter of fact, we just found out about them when we were at this conference in Denver, and we've got some of the first ones that and they work well. And so oftentimes what we do is we bring people in, like if they're coming from out of town, we'll call these in for them. And I say, put that thing on. It's real easy to put on and just wear it for the week before you come in here. And then, we implement things and we kind of teach them what to do. And then the difference between the first week when they were just doing whatever and the second week is striking. As a matter of fact, I had a patient today that flew in from Vegas, was here last week. We put the monitor on him when he was here and we looked, he wore the monitor all last week and his numbers were like this, and he started our nutrition protocol yesterday and around noon and his numbers were like, and about noon yesterday, they went straight line for the last 24 hours. He's like, this is crazy. I'm like, yeah, like this is data we can get. It's there. And we started using glucose monitors a couple of years ago for my benefit. I wanted to know what was happening. We very quickly found it was a huge benefit for our patients because they changed behavior. They would eat something and be like, oh, that's bad. I shouldn't eat that. And so it's a great tool.
I learned that. And again, I told you, I've sort of dove down that rabbit hole a little bit myself, just because I'm always curious. And using a continuous glucose monitor, people look at me, why are you doing that? Well, I wanted to learn more about what was working and what wasn't working in my life. I wanted to know where my fasting or resting sugar was. What does it look like in that pre-dawn, that pre-waking sort of spike you get, or that everybody's supposed to get before they wake up? And it was interesting to see what was going on. And more importantly, after I ate something that caused the spike, how long before it went down, right? Yeah. And what did different foods do to that? Did a cupcake treat it differently than a loaf of bread, right? It was really interesting to watch. And after about 4 weeks, I'd had enough of being this thing stuck in my arm that was like, I'd have put tape on it to keep it on. And I was like, I'm done.
These are better. They're small. Like, I mean, I've run mud runs with them on before. I mean, just to, I don't do anything with our patients. I don't try myself. And so I'm like, how tough are these things? And so there was a period of time where I was like doing all this crazy stuff, wearing one to see if it would mess it up and put the covers on them. Regardless, people still would knock the old ones off all the time because
it would come out and
they were tall, but these I think are going to be a lot better.
Yeah. And the green cover that went on it was just so messy, but I definitely can't wait to try it. My question for you is, okay, someone's pre-diabetic. We put them on a different nutritional plan, right? I first started learning about those kinds of plans years ago with Michel Montagnac, who most people have not heard of. He was a French diet guy from the 60s and 70s who ultimately went a little too commercial, but he really started speaking a great deal back in the 70s about glycemic indices and how some carbs were good and some carbs were bad, and how raw carrots versus cooked carrots created totally different glycemic indices. So I read all of his books back in the 80s and wanted to learn more about it back then to see what was, or his like 1986 or so, I think was his first book. And so I've always been intrigued by this, but nowadays, other than nutrition, what other tools are at people's disposal for metabolic syndrome other than exercise and nutrition, which everybody wants to talk about, eat better and work out? Are there things we can give ourselves or microdose with or work on to help us with losing weight, to help us with getting our pancreas healthy again?
And there are. And
by the way, that I'm throwing a softball question because he and I have talked about this and what he's about to talk about. I'm just going to warn everybody because it could appear like what we're about to get into is extremism, but it's not. just as he said earlier, think about the biohacking that's available today and what we know. So when we start talking about what he's going to start talking about, which we didn't plan, but I know where we're headed, I want you to keep an open mind about the fact about why this could change your life. And so, sorry, Jeff, I wanted to jump in there and just say that.
So I think that we always look at everything through sort of 5 areas, 5 pillars of health: nutrition, fitness, sleep, stress, hormones. And, you can make a huge change in any one of those areas and really not see any functional change at all. You make small changes in all those and you're going to see really big results. And so when we talk about insulin resistance, we want to look at sleep, we want to look at stress, those play a role. But then, I've got some letters at the end of my name that allow me to kind of cheat a little bit. And so, there are medications we can use, things like metformin, which have been studied as anti-aging agents. They improve insulin sensitivity. In my emergency medicine career, if you came in as a new onset diabetic, I would never prescribe insulin because I am never going to see you again. If I give you something that's going to lower your blood sugar and you take your insulin and you get in your car and you kill somebody, it's my fault. So we use metformin as a first-line drug because it makes your insulin sensitivity better. So if we've got that mismatch, it lowers your insulin level and kind of helps get your blood sugar under control under your own steam. And it doesn't make you hypoglycemic, so I'm not going to kill you accidentally. We've got more fancy drugs now, and we've been using GLP-1 agonists for quite a while now. Well, they've been in the news like every day. It seems like the last month or so. Semaglutide, it's the Hollywood weight loss drug. Well, GLP-1 agonists we use for a very particular reason. It's a once-a-week injection, so compliance is good. It improves insulin sensitivity. It lowers gastric motility, meaning that you gastric emptying slows, so you feel full faster. And centrally, it kind of turns your appetite down and improves insulin sensitivity. And we get great results, and also it tends to lower inflammation and also optimizing hormones. And there's a difference between normal and optimal. And, so I had a guy in today, he was 73-year-old, and he's been to his doctor. He feels lousy. He's very successful. He owns all these companies. He still works, he's starting a new company, 73. And he went to his doctor and he doesn't feel good. And he's got diabetes. But he said, doc, I don't feel like, I've Googled it. I think my testosterone's off. And his total testosterone was like 300 or something. And he goes, and he called me up on the phone first and he said, what do you think? I said, well, telling me what your total testosterone is a little bit like me telling you the score of the baseball game's 10. Like if I don't have all the pieces, so I need to know more. I need to know what your free is. I need to know what your DHEA is. I need to know what your sex hormone binding globulin is. And he came in and we said, well, look, your free testosterone is very low. Your sex hormone binding globulin is very high. And so in his case, he needs more testosterone, but also his A1C is like 8. I'm like, dude, you're completely uncontrolled with your diabetes. And they just have him on one drug, and the docs, his doctor said, well, it's okay. I'm like, you're 73. Do you want to live to be 90? Because you're this vibrant guy. And he's got, this big visceral fat. He's got a big belly on him. And like, to me, that's a guy who's got metabolic problems. And we can, but his fasting insulin level was 33. So it's high. That means his pancreas still works. So we can fix that. Like that's a guy we can literally fix. But we'll use all these different tools. We're going to put a monitor on him. We're going to use the nutritional things. We're going to use some of these things like optimizing his testosterone, but we're also going to look at his growth hormone. And you talked about, ipamorelin and CJC. Those are secretagogues that make us release growth hormone more. So we want to optimize all these different hormones. Thyroid, we need to look at testosterone, estrogen, progesterone in women, but also estrogen in men. I think a lot of people have probably heard people getting testosterone replacement and they need to take an estrogen blocker. If your doctor is giving you an estrogen blocker, you need to run away.
Yeah, you were going to drop an F-bomb there, weren't you? I saw the lips start to purse.
Estrogen is a potent protector of the heart against heart disease, of the brain against dementia, the bones against osteoporosis. Women die of heart disease at the same rate that men do, but they do not develop heart disease until when they hit menopause, when they lose estrogen. And in men, there's plenty of studies that show if you lower their estrogen levels, they die of heart attacks. So the idea of giving men estrogen blockers is insane. And so how do you raise estrogen levels in men? you optimize their testosterone,
Right.
because it'll aromatize to estrogen. And so my normal for estrogen for men is like, 60, 80, something like that. And people are like, oh, I'm going to grow boobs. No, you're not. You know what your estrogen levels was when you were 17? It was about 150, because you had so much testosterone.
Right.
Did you have boobs when you were 17? I mean,
Yeah.
so,
but I just want to hit that for a second, because again, I'm 55. You're what? You're a year or two older than I am, right?
Yeah, 56.
Yeah. So I was young when I went to college, folks. That's just the reason I know he's a year older. And so in full disclosure, and I've got no problems saying what I'm about to say. So I'm 53 years old, 54 years old, somewhere around there. And I feel great, but I notice I'm gaining belly fat, right? Not massive amounts, but for the first time in my life, I just can't lose weight. I can run, I can bike, I can row, I can lift, I can do everything right. I can eat right. And if I eat crystal clear, perfect diet, 6 to 8 weeks later, it just starts coming off of me, right? And it's an age thing. I notice a difference. So I speak to my friends, and what do they all say? You need testosterone. Everybody, right? You need testosterone. So you know this story. I've already told this to you, but I'm telling them. So what do? I go to a local T clinic, which they draw my blood and instantly tell me I need testosterone, right? And we're going to start giving you shots once a week. And by the way, here's the side effects. And it comes like from a commercial, right? Like all the things that can happen if you start getting testosterone. Don't mind that I don't have any of the sexual side effects that one typically might have with low testosterone, but we're going to give it to you anyway. And I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. So a good friend of mine has a friend who's going into that space, whatever you want to call that space. And I go to see him, and he says, well, I do love testosterone for you, but I wouldn't give you shots. I would give you pellets. I said, okay. He goes, yeah, we implant them and they stay there, and every whatever number of months you come back and get more, and it's steady release. And I'm still sitting here going, why am I getting testosterone? Like, why are you giving me testosterone? My levels are low-ish, but I have high energy. I'm able to, go there. I'm not a low energy guy. I don't have any of the other signs or symptoms of low T. And so, nobody's really looked at me at that point. And I go into an office, third office, and the guy says to me, the doctor's talking about T, but he leaves the room, and the PA says to me, you know what? If I were you, I wouldn't be thinking about testosterone. Number one, once you go on it at your age, you're on it for the rest of your life. It's exogenous. And if you take it and you come off of it, you could drop. I said, okay, I didn't know that. But he said, moreover, he goes, there's other things you can take that might be able to help you in other ways, like the CJC ipamorelin, right? Like that are secretagogues that help your own body produce stuff. And so in full disclosure, about 8 weeks ago, I started on that regimen of microdosing. I use a diabetic needle every night, 5 nights out of 7, to give just a little injection. And as I told you the other day when I texted you, can't say I've seen a huge difference. The only difference I've seen so far, because I've been told it takes 3 to 6 months to really see a difference. But 2 things. One, we're flying blind, because the doctor who did it for me never checked my IGF-1. So we really don't know whether I need it and what its effect has been. But number 2, the only thing I've noticed that's been really different is that for the first probably 2 to 3 weeks, when I did it, I'd fall asleep. I'd wake up 4.5 hours later with more energy than I knew what to do with. Like I woke up, I'd sleep 4.5 or 5 hours and be up at 3:30 or 4 in the morning and like complete energy for the rest of the day. I've never had so much energy in my life. So something tells me that, in fact, it is doing something when I take it. But my point in all of this, what I'm trying to get to is, number one, it goes to show you how little so many doctors know when it comes to this. Even quote unquote, the smart doctors, they're just ready. When you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I do testosterone for everybody. You're going to get testosterone. And number 2, there are things out there that we can get on or that we can use, as you said, to optimize. But what I'm failing to see in my life is that nobody ever tested me. And it wasn't Jeff who got me on this. It was a local doctor who I was talking to. But once I go see you, I can't wait to optimize. That we need to maintain a knowledge base on what these things are doing to us along the way. But these are not steroids. These are not going to kill us. We're not going to get cancer from these things. They're going to help us. But it really, do you think there's a stigma there about people saying, well, I don't want to stick myself with a needle? What good is that going to do for me?
I think so. I also think this idea of like, once you get on it, you never get off. I think that if you do it correctly, you're only going to, our levels only drop as we age, right? And we get men of all ages that come in, and, sometimes I'll get a young guy. I had a guy a couple weeks ago, he's like 22. He's got all the symptoms of low T, and we check his levels, and, they're like 100, and his free is like 3. And,
wow. By the way,
it's
considered normal, and I put that in air quotes, as what?
Well, I mean, it depends on the age, but like certainly like a normal total testosterone for a 20-year-old should be, 400 plus, maybe 500, really probably in the 800s, but regardless. And I'm looking at him, and we did some other labs and identified that it was not coming from the pituitary. He wasn't some kind of like brain tumor or something like that. And I finally said to him, I said, well, when did you do the steroids? He's like, I don't do steroids. I'm like, dude, I'm not the police. I'm not here to judge you. Well, I just did it one time. And so what he did was he did anabolic steroids, and he did such a huge dose that he shut his system down. And for that kid, all we had to do was basically restart the system. And so there's a way of doing that. And we gave him the appropriate medicines to kind of turn his system back on. And 4 weeks later, his levels were normal. He won't need any more therapy until he's, 45 or so.
Right.
So, and we often like look at those levels, like at our age. I mean, like, you're not going to suddenly start making a lot of testosterone. Like, you just aren't. Now that doesn't mean that some guys don't, but probably not. But if you're younger, sometimes we'll use other things that stimulate your own production, or we may do it hand in hand. We may give a little bit of testosterone along with some of these other medications that stimulate your own production. And that way we don't turn the system off,
right.
So to speak. And so, and again, it's about the idea of this N equals 1. And so pellets, like, we talked about pellets. I would never do pellets because, if I want to treat you as an individual, like, your optimal is your optimal.
Right.
If I want to do pellets, I go to a weekend class, and I can make a lot of money doing this.
And that's what I'm seeing. A lot of people are doing that now.
Yeah. And I'm going to say, okay, I get a little cookbook, and it says, 55-year-old guy, he weighs this many, you're going to put this many pellets in. Okay. And I'm going to not really look real close, because he's going to feel some better, because those levels are going to go up. Like, he's definitely going to feel better. But the question is, like, how do I get you optimum? How do I get you optimized? Like, I know what that number is, what it is for you. And let's say I overshot. Let's say that your free is now 60. What do I do? Am I going to go and dig those pellets out?
Right. Which you can't do.
I'm going to just not check your levels and say, oh, you feel better. Suppose I undershoot, like, maybe I'll put another pellet or 2 in. But the problem is that they say the pellets last for 3 months. Well, I've had patients that have come to me from these pellet clinics that have had elevated levels for 6-8 months from those pellets. Right. So your own metabolism some people may metabolize it in a month and a half, and somebody might be 6 months. So if I add another set of pellets 3 months later, like, I can never get it right.
And then you wonder why my hematocrits are. You wonder why I have to go for phlebotomy, right? Everything's.
Yeah. But what did I tell you about the phlebotomy? So you don't need to go. No. Because it's not polycythemia. It's erythrocytosis. So the same thing, if we moved you to Denver and you started smoking 2 packs a day, what would happen to your hemoglobin? It would go up, right?
Yeah.
Same thing. If you lived in Lima, Peru, everybody there has a hemoglobin that's, markedly elevated if they came here. Right. Do they have strokes and heart attacks at an excessive rate there? No, they don't. I suspect no. It's basically what Lance, and company were doing with EPO.
Lance and company, right? Everybody was at the line, exactly.
Yeah, they were all raising their blood counts because it's safe and it improves your performance. So, I don't phlebotomize people because there's plenty of science that shows there's no risk. Right. Again, doctors see that elevated hematocrit. Oh, you got to stop the testosterone. I'm like, oh.
I want to hit you with 2 more questions as we wind this down, because you and I we could literally do this. And that's why I want to get you to Summit, because we could do this for days. But I want to ask 2 more questions. One, there's so much energy and advertising out there about men with low T, right? And again, I'm a walking example of somebody who fell into that trap a little bit. When you want to build a little more muscle, when you want to feel a little better in life, maybe a little more energy, or lose some body fat, right? But talk to me for a minute or 2 about women, because they don't get their due, right, when it comes to testosterone and what some of the things that I see a lot of my female women, my women friends who are in their 40s and 50s suffering from what crystal clear appears to me to be a hormonal imbalance, but their doctors are managing their menopause, or the doctors are managing where they are in life. Talk a little bit about that. And then the second question, I'll throw out to you as the last question I've got for you.
Okay. So I think with women, one of the most common things that we see, and this light, I'm sorry, I'm going to try to turn this down as the sun is going down here. It's like getting a little.
It's okay.
Is that better?
Yeah, it looks great.
Okay. So with women, typically they come to us, and one of the most common things is, I'm tired, I'm gaining weight, my hair is falling out, my nails are breaking, I'm depressed, I'm anxious, I'm cold all the time. And then, they're not dumb. They go to Dr. Google and they Google those symptoms. And the first 50,000 results are thyroid. And they go to their doctor and they say, hey, I think I got low thyroid. And their doctor checks a TSH and they says, oh, you're fine. And they don't listen to the fact that, this person took time out of their day to come see you because I got a problem. And you're like, your levels are fine. I've got women who've gone to their doctor 5 different times and gotten that same answer. And they come to us and we look a little closer, and it turns out that they definitely, 90% of the time, if a woman comes to me and says, I think I'm hypothyroid, they're correct. And when you look a little closer and you look at their free T3, you find out they've got suboptimal T3, and they don't convert their T4 to T3 well. T4, which is what's in Synthroid and things like that, is inactive. It's a storage form of hormone. It doesn't have any effect on symptoms. It's got to get converted to T3 to kind of fix the symptoms. And so if you have a low free T3, especially in women, if it's below 3, they're going to have symptoms 90% of the time. You fix that. And the crazy thing about it is they feel better like in a couple of days. I'll get these phone calls like, what did you do to me? I feel great. So but thyroid's the first place.
How do you fix that if they're not converting?
You've got to give them T3. So we often use a combination medicine, or add, if they're already on thyroid medicine, we add some T3. We get their free T3 where it needs to be, and it has a huge effect. Testosterone is another one. And, I lecture a lot. And one of the lectures I give is about testosterone. And there's a slide in there that says, what large swollen organ does testosterone have the biggest effect on? The next slide is a brain, not a penis, because the biggest effect of testosterone is on the brain in both men and women. Drive, motivation, memory, focus, cognitive function is all enhanced. Secondarily, body composition, ability to lose body fat, gain lean mass, which is really important. And thirdly, sort of sexual function. But really, it's about the brain. And so women need testosterone just like men need estrogen, just not in the quantities the other sex needs. And so with women, we want to get those levels also to like an optimal range. And we typically use topical testosterone to get those levels appropriate for women. We don't use a lot of injected testosterone. I've got women that come to me that get pellets that got testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, and it makes no sense. Because again, if you follow the science, like why would I always tell our patients when we talk about menopause, like there are benefits for you and there are benefits for me. And I don't know if you can see, like in the corner, I've got this little 7-menopausal dwarves poster, and they're like itchy, bitchy, scratchy, psycho, sweaty, and the women all laugh because they've got those symptoms. And I said, that's kind of what you want to get rid of. I said, for me as your doctor, what I want to do is avoid heart disease, dementia, and osteoporosis. The mortality rate of a hip fracture at 75 is about 40% at 1 year. Wow. It's not because hip fractures are all that dangerous, but you'll lose your independence and people get the dwindles. And I'm sure we all know somebody in our lives that was doing well, they fell, broke their hip, and they're dead within a year. So how do we prevent hip fractures in 75-year-olds? We start worrying about it when they're 40 and 50. But if you look at the literature, the benefits, the heart benefits, the brain benefits are really from oral estradiol. So you don't get it with topicals. You don't get it with pellets. So why would I give a medicine that has this ability to kind of help prevent heart disease and things like that in a form that doesn't cause that effect? Progesterone orally has a huge side effect that everyone hates. It makes you sleep like a baby. And only 95% of my female patients don't sleep well. So if you understand the science, you can provide both symptom relief and we can optimize. Again, we're always trying to optimize, and that's true prevention. If we can prevent that heart disease from happening, that's actual prevention, not screening for that colon cancer that might already be there.
Right.
And so we look at men and women, similarly, but they're very, very different, obviously.
Right.
But sort of those same hormone, a lot of the same hormones are overlap for men and women. There are some special things. We see thyroid disease in men as well, but by far, probably 80% of the time, it's females who are symptomatic with it.
Right. And that's why
so we really want to ask, we've got to ask those questions. And the other thing is we have to sort of listen to people. Like, I think, when someone comes in here, and a lot of times, they're not coming from across the street, they're coming from California or some, far away place. They took all the time to come here. Like, they've got real concerns, and I've got to take that seriously. If it's important to them, it's got to be important to me. And the other thing is that if you've got a real concern, it's grounded in reality. There's something going on. You just have to sort of figure out. Sometimes it's maybe not what people think it is. We find it's actually something else, but it's something.
Yeah. And then my father, who was a dentist for 50 years, told me, always listen to the patient. They know there's something going on.
Oh, yeah.
He always said, don't take an x-ray, see nothing, and go, well, everything's fine. Because they came to you saying, something's going on, doc. And the good docs slow down and take a look at it like you do. So my last question for you, my last broad question, relates to rapamycin. And from a very, very simple answer, again, the stuff we're talking about here, the overwhelming majority of people have never heard of, whether it's IGF-1 or CJC, like any of these things we're talking about, even testosterone, they may have known somebody who went to a clinic and got some shots for a couple of months, but they don't really understand it. Rapamycin blew my mind when I heard about it. What can you tell me about rapamycin? Is the lore of rapamycin true? What they're saying they're thinking it does?
So, I think just to backtrack just a second. So, when people come in and we do these evaluations and we get them optimized, and then after we get them optimized, then we try to biohack the heck out of them. Right. And so once we get people kind of dialed in, we start talking about things like growth hormone or secretagogues like CJC and ipamorelin or other ones. And then we start talking about rapamycin. And so rapamycin is a fascinating molecule. It was discovered on Easter Island, Rapa Nui. So it got its name from there. It was discovered to be one of the most potent antifungal agents ever found. And this company was trying to develop a drug out of it. The company went out of business and they sent out this memo that said, destroy all the samples. And there was a scientist that was working there and he didn't destroy it. He put it in the fridge in his garage and there it sat for like 15 or 20 years.
Until it started the COVID virus.
Yeah. He was working at another company and they sort of said, hey, does anybody have any pet projects that they're interested in? We're willing to like fund these projects. He goes, I got this soil in my freezer. And they took it out and they discovered that it's a really good immune modulator. And it has an effect in apoptosis, or the ability to clean out old degraded cells.
Senescent cells, right?
It's an immune mediator. And so it's used as an anti-rejection drug. Well, it turns out that there were some studies done in mice, and these mice were exposed to really a small amount of rapamycin, and they had incredible longevity enhancement. And one of the experiments was, I think there was a mistake in the experiment, and there was a delay in getting the mice the rapamycin, and they were actually given it when they were in mouse middle age. And these mice only lived for a couple of months, but instead of giving it to them when they were young, they were given much older. And even those mice had this great longevity benefit. And so there are human studies going on now. It's probably, we thought metformin was like going to be a really good anti-aging drug. And the studies have not really borne out the anti-aging effect of that. But the studies and the preliminary data for rapamycin is very good. And so I have a lot of patients on it. I take it myself. We have a protocol where we use it for about 5 or 6 weeks, and we do a little break for a period of time. We're measuring epigenetics, and we don't have great aging tools, but the tools that we have that seem to point to things really seem to improve when we have people on these medications. There are other types of medicines that we're looking at that have similar effect, but we're talking about bleeding edge stuff. And so this is like a conversation I have with people like, do you want to, like, this is not approved in any way. It's, it's an off-label use of the medication. I'm not going to hurt you with it. But you don't have, I'm not going to tell you need to do this, but we get to people to that level and they're like, what else can I do? Like they're excited, like you are,
like me.
And so
I read the studies. I went to PubMed and I read the studies from the mice. I just as a quick aside, I originally heard it again on one of the podcasts. There's a neuro researcher out of University of Washington who talked about doing a 10,000 companion dog study on rapamycin to extend the lifespans and the quality of life of the dogs. And he went into the conversation. He says, look, I had a bad shoulder. I've been an athlete my whole life. I had a bad shoulder. I could barely even lift my arm. I went to my doctor. My doctor said, take these painkillers and go for physical therapy. He went for physical therapy for like 6 months, still had pain in his shoulder, went back to the doctor. Doctor said, go back for physical therapy. And he was just getting fed up with it. And he said, look, I'm doing a study on rapamycin for dogs. We're clearing out senescent cells and all this stuff. He goes, I'm doing low dose. I'm going to try it on myself. He goes, I'm well aware of the placebo effect. Okay, it's out there. He says, but I'm telling you, within 1 week of taking rapamycin, I was in the front yard throwing a football around with my son, which I hadn't done in years. And the more you hear the stories about rapamycin, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but the story or so what I've heard is, number one, there's a lot of misinformation out there because rapamycin was used in rejection, kidney rejection, and that people are saying, I would never, ever, ever allow you to take this because it's such a potent but they don't understand that the dosing is so much lower. Yeah. That's the first. And the second is, I heard that the theory behind it is that there are all these cells, through apoptosis and what have you, these cells that have sort of done their deed, if you will, but are there, they're useless, they're dead. There's been apoptosis and they're not out of the body. And so the body creates this low level inflammation that's always there trying to essentially attack these cells that are foreign bodies, and that the whole point of rapamycin is to help eliminate these senescent cells so that the body is no longer listening to this sort of immune white noise, if you will. Is there truth to, did I say it? Did I just talk out my rear end, or is there actually
no,
truth?
You did it very well. And I hate to speak about anecdotes because like there's no science there, but I will have to I'm going to share my own experience. So I've had multiple shoulder surgeries. I do CrossFit, and my right shoulder was really bothering. It was like, I had this like sharp pain here. It really had compromised my ability to do stuff. I knew it wasn't like another tear, but it was definitely like a tendonitis. And I'd done like 2 courses of steroids and it would get better a little bit. And it'd been going on literally for about 10 months. And I was like, do I need to go and like see one of my ortho colleagues and get an injection, or maybe think about doing stem cells or something, take it to the next level. And that was in the back of my head. And then we decided, well, we read all these studies on rapamycin and said, I think it's reasonable. I never do anything. I never have my patients do anything I don't do. So I'm going to start it on myself. So started taking rapamycin and been taking it for maybe a month or so. It's once a week, took it for about a month. And my wife said, did you make that ortho appointment yet? And I'm like, what ortho appointment? She's like, for your shoulder. I'm like, my shoulder, it's all gone, like completely. It hasn't bothered me since. Now, I cannot in any way, manner, or form say that rapamycin did that, but it's interesting that you had that story, and I had a similar experience. I've had a few other patients that have sort of reported similar things. Again, those are anecdotes, and like, a meteor could have crashed in my front yard, and I can't say, well, I took rapamycin last week, that must have caused it.
Right. There's a difference between causation and
Yeah. But that was my personal experience with
correlation and causation are 2 different things. Yeah. But I will say that I've got a patient of mine who's a very well-respected oncologist, Stanford trained in Boston, Stanford. Like, she's got 45 initials after her name. Really bright woman. And I told her about rapamycin. She said, I would take that in a heartbeat. She's like, you should definitely like. And so The good news here is what you and I are talking about, and what I hope to follow up with at some later date, is that there's this burgeoning world of longevity, fitness, health, that yes, it can't be administered to the entire population now. Maybe down the road, just like a PlayStation 3, everybody can have access to, it's cutting edge now. And many of the people listening have the financial means and the ability and the access, thankfully, through people like yourself, to be able to access this and learn about it and get the testing and get the hormonal modulation to get yourselves to where your optimal should be, to be able to work on biohacking in a way that we know is safe and we know is effective. And I guess the last thing I'm going to ask you is, I'm coming out to you with Alyssa, my wife. We're going to come out in February, which will be amazing. I know there are people I've connected with you who, after a conversation with you, said, I was going to go to the Cooper, I was going to go to Duke, but it sounds like what you're doing is far more valuable personally. So the two questions I'll ask you as we finish this are, if someone wanted to come see you, what does it look like in terms of a day or two, or what's exactly going on? And number two, how do they contact you if they want to talk to you about this?
Yeah. So in terms of contact, if you can maybe give them my personal email or the number to the clinic, both, either one of those will work fine.
Do you want to say it right now so that everybody at least has it?
Yeah, it's Dr. Galvin at VitalityMWI.com.
So Dr. Galvin.
Yep. Dr. Galvin
at Vitality.
M as in Michael, I as in indigo, or I'm sorry, W as in water and I as in indigo.
Okay.
WI Institute. Yeah. MWI.
Okay. VitalityMWI.com.
Yeah. And if you just put www in front of that, VitalityMWI.com, you'll get our website, and all of our contact information is there.
Great.
But I'm glad to, have a conversation with anybody that's interested in. So, we do a variety of things, but our big what most people that are coming from away are doing is what we call a 2-day evaluation. It's not really 2 days here, although we do things over 2 days. But we do genetics and epigenetics, and some of those things take a little while to come back. The interesting about the genetics is, like, we can look at your genetics and we can tell you whether you respond to salt or not. It's in your genetics. If you got the gene, you're a responder. And you're right. We make these guidelines for a tiny percentage of the whole population. There's a small population of percentage of the population that have hypertension. There's a tiny percentage of those that are salt sensitive. Yet we're going to tell everybody don't eat salt.
Right. And there is value from a kidney perspective about why you wouldn't want to overdo it with salt, right? But again, what I love the idea is two things. You said, number one, when I come out, right, you do all the body scans, you do the carotid, you do the heart, you do you do everything to make sure that you're trying to pick up early on any of the factors that could predispose you to any of the problems that could come down the road. And I don't know if you do it regularly, but do you do that test with the cancer cells testing?
Yes. Yes.
That what you got to talk about it, because when I heard about that, you just blew my mind.
There's a test basically that looks at cell-free DNA. And so whenever cells divide, some little pieces of the DNA kind of sneak out and they end up in the bloodstream. And so what they've been able to figure out is that we can identify cancer DNA in the serum. And so there's a blood test that we can do that will detect 50 types of cancers, like all the most common cancers, with the exception of brain, because the blood-brain barrier doesn't let that DNA pass. So that DNA doesn't sneak out of the blood-brain barrier, but everything else. And we can identify cancers when they're very early. And we're talking about things like, killers, like head and neck cancers and pancreatic cancer, colon, breast, ovarian, many cancers that we have no screening for. Like, what do we really screen for? We screen for breast cancer, for prostate cancer, for colon cancer. We don't really screen for a lot of other ones beyond that. Maybe if you do a screening chest x-ray for smokers, maybe a little bit of lung cancer, but for the most part, we don't discover cancer until it's symptomatic. And in the case of pancreatic cancer, do you know anybody that's ever had pancreatic cancer?
I do.
It's horrible. I had a very good friend that died in 3 months from pancreatic cancer, ER doctor. Almost, hugely high mortality rate because it's never discovered until it's stage 4, until it's symptomatic. Right. You can discover it at stage 1, completely curable, huge cure rate. So that test is one of the things that we do. We do a very advanced genetic test that is also very private. So, you do 23andMe, you're giving them all your data. They catch serial killers and stuff like that. Why do they know that? Even though the data is blinded, how did they catch the serial killer? Well, they were able to connect them somehow.
Yeah.
And, we deal with levels of patients that probably don't want that information out there. You don't
Too
want
late
your
for me.
insurer
I
to
already
get
gave them
that.
mine.
Yeah, wow.
Well, the good news is I turned out to be 99.5% Ashkenazic Jew. And my wife is 100%. And then my daughter, God bless her, love my daughter, magna cum laude. She's like, I want to get tested. I'm like, are you out of your mind? Your mother's 100% Ashkenaz. Your father's 99.5. If you get a result that says anything different, it's going to destroy the family. So don't go get tested. But anyway, I'm sorry. So you were saying that before I said.
So we do it. It's a very advanced genetic test. We also do epigenetics, which kind of gives us that the aging. So epigenetics is gene expression. You can change your epigenetics. You really can't, short of getting bit by a radioactive spider, you're not changing your genetics. But your epigenetics, you can actually change. And the other neat thing is we can tell you things like, are you a responder or non-responder to calorie restriction? I can tell you from looking at how much you smoke, if you smoke, how much you drink, if you drink. It's crazy. Like some of the things we can get from the epigenetic testing. And
whether or not, I suspect, whether or not a keto diet really makes a difference for you, or a vegetarian diet, which right now is all the rage.
Yeah, we can try to figure out, and we get, we do a very advanced panel of labs, stuff that your doctor probably would never do. We do, a lot of fitness testing. We do a baseline workout one day. The next day we do a VO2 max test where we put you on the bike and we figure out what your maximum aerobic capacity is, which lets us figure out your heart rate zones. And a lot of times we work with people like to hack their exercise, like doing zone 2 training, for example, is something that we do a lot of. Well, you need to know what your zone 2 is. And so we can figure that out. We do a pretty intensive neurocognitive test. We look and we can pick up cognitive decline very early. And like I said, if we can identify it early, we can reverse it. We do body composition. We have a DEXA scanner. We look at bone density, body composition. We do a mobility assessment. We do photographs, measurements. The list goes on and on. It's a pretty full couple days when you're here. Yeah. And then a lot of the stuff we can do, follow-up stuff we can do remotely. I can get labs anywhere. We can do a lot of this stuff. You don't need to come back, 5 times a year. We like people to come back if they can, at least once, right, if possible. But we can manage things remotely. And, just like we're talking, we're states apart, and it's like you're in the room with me.
And do concierge medicine.
We do.
From afar, because as you said, 99% of what you're solving, if you can't solve it over Zoom, the person needs to go to the hospital. Yeah.
And also, we tend to get people so healthy, they don't really get sick.
Hey, I've got a sinus infection, or hey,
I
traveled to India and I got sick.
Yeah. We rarely run into big problems because we generally get people pretty healthy.
Yeah. And that's why I said, I'm sure the Cooper Clinic, which is world famous for this sort of stuff, is great. But in all honesty, to tell everybody, literally on the end of my block, not the end of my street, but my particular block that ends at a red light 200 yards away, that's the Cooper Clinic. And my wife and I are flying to Charlotte to see you, just because your knowledge and personalized way of looking at things. And that, to be crystal clear, I have no financial interest whatsoever with anything to do with you or Vitality. And just because we're fraternity buddies, I would not be sending people to you just for that reason. But when we sat and went through the science together, and I'd already been diving down this rabbit hole, and then I started talking to you and you just took it to the next level. This is what I believe modern day medicine should be. I think it's what anybody who can avail themselves of the opportunity to partake in this should. And again, literally every person I introduce you to ends up wanting to come to Charlotte. So I hope many of you out there listening engage with Jeff and have a conversation. And even if he's not the right fit for you, for whatever reason you choose, you're not coming to Charlotte, the goal is for you to come away more knowledgeable about what the opportunities are, what the hoaxes are, and how to help yourself get to be the best version of you. That's what I'm really doing here. And my hope is to get you to Summit so you can talk a little bit more about the things that people can implement day to day and understand better. And so,
I'd love to.
So thank you from the bottom of my heart, Jeff, for doing this. Really appreciate it. And And again, anybody wants to get a hold of him, it's Dr. Galvin at vitalitymwi.com.
That's correct.
Wow. My cognitive function is not unless you send me to the supermarket to get something. Then I won't.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly.
But thanks, Jeff. I really appreciate you. And hopefully people will learn more.
Well, listen, it was my pleasure. Great talking to you, Glenn, as always.
Yes, sir. And just as I always tell people, stay healthy.
All right. Thanks for having me.